Okay, thank you, Sam. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining my talk today. So I would like to greet all of you, probably from Brunei, from Indonesia, and from other places in the world. And today I'm going to give a talk about one of the product that recently released by Google, named Serverless Workflow. So again, my name is Imre, and I'm Cloud Platform Engineer in Gojek. Gojek is a ride-hailing application in Indonesia, and we also offer several other services like GoFood, for food delivery and home cleaning services and logistic services and so many things. And I'm also part of Google Developer Expert Team for Cloud in Indonesia. And yeah, that's all. We're going to start by talking about the typical workflow that we usually have in our application. Let's say that when you are going to e-commerce, probably you will find that a flow or workflow for generating an invoice, and probably if you want to check out, there is also workflow for checkout and making payment and that kind of thing. And usually all of this workflow will consist of several steps, right? Like the first one, if we talk about the e-commerce, we will have invoice generation. So when we are creating an invoice, basically what we need to do, we're going to create the invoice object. It contains the data about the user's name, the item that the user purchased, and probably the address and a lot of informations. And then by using that data, the data will be passed to the next step, which is for generating the PDF. And after that, when the PDF is generated, the PDF will be sent to the users. If you see here on the screen, there will be two different technologies that is used for generating an invoice. The first one is Google Cloud Run for creating the invoice object. And for the second and the last part, it's going to use Google Cloud Function. So this is what I mean by a workflow. You start with something and then you ended up with something. And there is also another case where basically you send reminder for overdue account. What you need to do first, probably you will call Google Cloud Function that retrieve a list of customers. And then for each customers, what you're going to do, you're going to check whether the user is overdue or not. If they are overdue for the payment, you're going to send a reminder by using another technology, let's say Google App Engine. So this is typical workflow that we usually have. There are a lot of things that probably you ever faced before, and all of them will consist of several steps. But what really requires in creating a workflow? Let's assume that if one step, let's say one step execution produce a lot of data, like an invoice, probably all of the data won't be needed by the next execution step, which is the generating invoice. Invoice probably have many informations like name, address, items, discount, and so on. But probably when generating invoice, you need some information out of them. Let's say just item and user email. So the next execution step just need to receive enough information for them to process the data or to finish the job. So efficient work handover is really important in this case, so that the next execution step doesn't really have to accept all of the data from the previous step. So the next thing that is important if we are talking about workflow is about reliable step execution. So when a step is receiving data from the previous step, we need to make sure that that step can be completed. If something happened in the middle of the process, let's say that there is a machine failure or network contention, we need to make sure that the job will be retried. So this is why we need to have reliable step execution. If the job is not fully executed, we want to make sure that the system will do it for you. The system will retry it for you so that the job can finish the task. The next thing is about execution decision. So when you receive a data from the previous step in your workflow, probably you're going to make decision based on the data. Probably you want to go to the left path or you want to go to the right path. Let's say that when we are talking about a workflow for sending an advertisement, so you just need to make sure that you will send the advertisement to the correct users. The correct users probably means that the users that has interest to the product, or probably the users that subscribe to your newsletter and that kind of thing. And you want to make sure that you don't send advertisement to people who are not interested in your product, especially to the people who are not opt-in to receive the promotion email. And the last thing, not the last thing, but one most important thing that probably we usually forget when we are creating something is about operating and monitoring. So in my opinion, it's really important to get to know about the latency or time taken to execute the workflow. Let's say that in your workflow, you have 5 or 10 steps, and you want to make sure that each steps behave as expected, which means the latency of each step is still acceptable. Let's say that one step can process the data within 200 milliseconds, and the next step is less than 50 seconds, and so on. You probably will have SLI or SLO for your specific step. Thus, in this case, if you get something, probably the latency suddenly spike up or suddenly increase, you need to know which step that produced that kind of error. And after that, by having that kind of information, you can go to specific step or a specific function, and then do some fixes and redeploy it so that the overall time execution for your workflow is still acceptable. And also the last thing that I want to share here is about the error and logging. When you have a workflow and suddenly the job is failing, you need to know what is the contextual information when the failure happened. This is why operation and monitoring are really important, basically to get to know the problem faster and to react to the problem faster. A lot of things that I have explained basically is contained in one most recent product released by Google named Serverless Workflow. So what is workflow actually? Workflow basically a product that can orchestrate and integrate several things in Google Cloud Platform and also in outside world. If you see the screen here, we have within the GCP, we have serverless and we have the Google APIs. For serverless, we will have Google Cloud Run, we will have Cloud Function and App Engine and probably the other type of serverless in GCP. But also we have Google APIs like Google Cloud Vision, Google Cloud PubSub, translation, and many type of Google's API. And if you want to orchestrate all of them, let's say that in the first execution step, you want to call Google Cloud Run, and then in the next step, you're going to call Cloud Vision, and then you go back to another Cloud function, then you execute another function. You can also orchestrate it with Google Cloud Workflow. However, if you have other external system like the legacy API that you host in your on-premise or probably in another cloud platform, you can also use that as long as they are HTTP ready. You can use that to be integrated with Google Cloud Workflow. So Google Cloud Workflow can integrate serverless, Google API, and external API, whether it is your own private API or third-party API like SendGrid or probably Facebook API, GitHub API, and so on. So you can integrate all of them in one place. So the features that I would like to mention here is, actually there are many features that you can read more on the documentation, but several things that I would like to highlight. The first one is Google Serverless Workflow is fully managed, so you don't have to manage the machine. And it's also scalable because it scales from 0 to million calls. You don't have to think about adding more machines so that your workflow can run properly. And also there is no cold start. So if you use Cloud Function or Cloud Run before, when there is no request and then suddenly there is a new request coming, there will be cold start, which means that the time that requires by the system to be up and running. But in Workflow, we don't have cold start. So that means every time you call the Workflow API, it will immediately react to the request and then do the job. And also, if you're talking about the error handling or probably logging, it's also integrated with Google Cloud Stack Driver. And the next thing that I would like to show later is about how we're going to pass the variable between one workflow step to another workflow step. So let's say that when we have created the invoice on the first step, and then when we want to generate the PDF, we can pass several variables to the next step so that it can finish the job. Okay, so security is also the important thing that Google put in mind when releasing this product. So if you already have IAM in your system, you can use that to prevent unauthenticated invocation. Let's say that you want to give access to just several users like yourself and then your friend in your company, and then you can also use Google IAM in order to do so. And also, if your workflow want to use the serverless Cloud Run or Cloud Function or probably the other type of GCP services, it's also integrated with the IAM. Or let's say that usually when you have Cloud Run, you already specify which user can have access to this Cloud Run. You can also use the same rule in your cloud workflow. So that's really convenient. And also, when you want to access the external API, most of the time you're going to need the API key or credential that you can use to access the external API, right? And you can also integrate Cloud Workflow with Secret Manager. So Secret Manager is basically secret storage in GCP. You can store your DB password and a lot of sensitive information. And then you can use the API to retrieve the informations. And you can also integrate it with Google Cloud Workflow. So all of these things keep your workflow really secure in GCP. So this is the sample of the workflow. If you see here, I have two steps. The first one is I'm calling the API for Cloud Vision. basically to extract text from an image. And then after I got the raw text, I will pass the raw text to another Google Cloud function, which basically extracts several information out of the raw text. So if you see here, I have two steps. This is step definition in Google Cloud Workflow. So this is for different use cases, but as you can see here, what we can do here, we have two different steps. The first one is for getting the time. We basically provide the type of the HTTP method, whether it's HTTP GET or HTTP POST, and then you specify the URL of the application. Let's say in this case, I have a Google Cloud function in here. And then when I got the result can be stored in a one variable here. And then when I execute the next step, I also specify what is the HTTP method in here. This is HTTP GET. And also, if you take a look here, I will create another request to Wikipedia API. And then I specify the query. Query means for URL query. So you can specify the URL query, or you can also specify the JSON body. It depends on the request. In here, I give the parameter action with the value open search, and then the value for search as the current time, which is the result that I got from the previous step. And I can access the body and the day of the week. And once I got the result from Wikipedia, basically I will just print out the information here. So this is the sample workflow that we can create in Google Cloud Workflow. Right now I'm gonna do showcase, because actually there are not so many things that you need to know about a cloud workflow, but I'm gonna show you later on in demo. So this is the demo that I did on DevFest 2018. So it's basically, I created several Google Cloud functions to process national ID card of Indonesia citizen. So the use case is basically, we have several e-wallet application in Indonesia, but to verify the users, they're gonna ask you to take a picture of your national ID card so that they can compare the data that you give to them via their system and the data that you have in your national ID card. And imagine that if you have million users, there will be so much time required for processing all of those things. So if you want to automate it, it will be better. So that's the thing that I did on 2018. This is my blog post, but unfortunately it's written in Bahasa Indonesia. But you can still take a look into the code, and I posted on Medium, and I also gave the URL so you can access it later. This is a sneak peek of a sample for national ID card of Indonesian citizen. So this is the province where they live, and this is the ID card number. There are also information like name, and then the place of birth, and then the gender, the addresses, and so on. In this demo, I'm going to extract this information by using Cloud Vision API, and then I'm going to compare the data based on the data that I have in my database, because let's assume that I have a function that can give me information about the users, and then I will compare the data with the data that I got from here. So a bit about Cloud Vision API. It's another Google Cloud API for image processing. You basically can extract the information, text information from an image. In this case, we are using optical character recognition to take out the text. And when it returns the information about the text, it returns the raw text, and also it returns the position of the text within the image. So if you have more sophisticated use case, you can also use that kind of information. But in this case, I'm just using the raw text. The approach that I did 2 years ago is like this. I use Cloud Function to basically upload the image of the national ID card picture, and then I put it in Google Cloud Storage. In order to trigger the next step, the next function, I will use the event from Google Cloud Storage, because when you upload something to Google Cloud Storage, it will emit an event, and then you can consume that event to trigger another function. And this function basically call Google Cloud Vision API to get the raw text. In order to send the information to the next function, I'm going to send the data to Google Cloud PubSub. Google PubSub is basically a publish and subscribe pattern. In GCP, you can use that kind of thing. It's a message broker. You submit a message in here, and then the system will find out the message to all of the subscribers. In this case, the subscriber is for extracting the user data. So you got the raw data over here, and then you extract the user data in here. If you can see here, in order to trigger the next step, what I need to do is basically calling another services. I have to put the data in Google Cloud Storage. I use that event, and then I put the data on Google Cloud pops up, and then I use that to trigger another function, which is not really efficient in my opinion. So what we can do with Google Cloud Workflow. So the same thing for uploading the image. I put the image in Google Cloud Storage, but in this case, I'm not going to use the event emitted by Google Cloud Storage to trigger the next step. So what I did here, I will have a Google Cloud function which upload an image, and then once the image is uploaded, I will call Google Cloud Workflow API to trigger the job that I created before. So if you see here, the green box is everything inside the Google Cloud Workflow. So I have a workflow for extracting a raw text from an image. Basically, it's an API call to Cloud Vision, and I pass the information to extract the user's data. And on the next step, I will have another Google Cloud function, basically to, let's assume that I'm simulating a database call to my user database to get whether a user that I want to validate is exists or not. And once I get the data, I'm going to do data comparison and see whether the user is matched or not. If the data is matched, and then we're going to send the message to Slack. Otherwise, we just do nothing. So I'm going to do demo. But before that, I'm going to show you the code. So we're going to start by checking the function. So this is a Python script that I created. It has several functions that I deployed to Cloud Function. I'm going to start with this one. So this is a function, get user data by email, the user function that I use to retrieve for a given user email. I will return the user's data, including the birth date, and then the city of the residence, the ID card, and the name and its province. So this is just for one users because this is just a simple demo. I'm not going to create a real database. But right now, when I give an email, I will just return this data. And then I have another function, basically to extract eKTP text. eKTP basically means the national ID card in Indonesia. And then we have this function. Basically, it will get the raw text from Google Cloud Vision. And in this case, I'm going to run several regex, regular expression. And then I'm going to extract the data. Let's say that in this case, I want to check the province, the city name, and the ID card number, and the name and the birth date. So everything I did is just by using regex or regular expression. And also the gateway function that will be called, let's say, by the front end web or probably the mobile app web is the function named verify eKTP. So the verify national ID card. And what I did in here, basically it will accept a file. So I will create a post request here. I specify the image here. And then what I did, I will upload the image to a GCS bucket named Cloud Workflow Demo. And after that, I'm going to create a JSON body for the next request that I will send to Google Cloud Workflow. The JSON body will contain the image URI in GCS. This is the GCS path, Cloud Workflow Demo, and the name of the image itself. And I will specify the user email, which will be taken from the HTTP post data. And once I have this data, I'm going to trigger the job in a Google Cloud Serverless Workflow. The way I do it is by using Python SDK. So I create a client, execution client, and then I create execution by calling create execution function. I specify the request, and I give information about which workflow that I want to trigger. In this case, the workflow name is project/Imre demo/location US central /workflow/user validation. So this is all of the function that I have. We're going to stop here, but right now we're going to go to Google Cloud Workflow. This is the dashboard of Google Cloud Workflow that I have. I have right now one workflow that I created for this demo. And in here, if we take a look here, I already have the execution history. This is not really important, actually, but I'm just going to show you this is the history for the execution. You can also see the logs, and you can also see the definition of the workflow that I defined. Everything is created in YAML, but I'm not going to show it to you here. I'm going to go to my code editor. In here, this is the workflow that we created for this demo. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get the text from the image. we call Fission API. We can also specify type of the authentication that we're gonna do. We specify the body request because this is HTTP post, and we specify the image that we put on the function that I showed you before, which is the image URI. Once I get the data from here, I put it as a raw text. In here, I will call the next function named extract text. This is basically calling the cloud function that I created before and I showed you before. I specify the authentication type by using OIDC, and I specify the request body, which is the raw text that I get from the Google Cloud Fission API in here. And also, after that, I'm gonna get the user's data from my database. In this case, I'm calling another cloud function, which HTTP get. This is the URI, and then I specify the authentication as well. I specify the query, which is the user's email that I give before. And once I get the result here, I will call the next step, which is the user data match. Basically, in here, we're gonna do execution decision. We will have switch block, which contains several conditions, but in this case, I only have one condition, which is to compare whether the data that I got from my database is equal with the data that I got from the Cloud Fission API. And if this is valid, I'm gonna trigger the next step, which is send verified notification on Slack. Otherwise, I'm gonna trigger the next step, which is not verified, which basically just say the user is not verified. That's all. That's what we're gonna do. And I think that's all. So that's the thing that we will do. To trigger that, because I already have the function deployed, I'm gonna trigger a gateway function, which is to verify the eKTP that I showed you before. I specify the image of the ID card. I also specify the email of the users in here. If I trigger it, it should work, hopefully. It says okay. And then right now it's 10:45 a.m. in Indonesia. And then I got notification in Slack saying that Tuhan is verified, because the name that we have in database is matched with the name that we have in the database. And probably I forgot to tell you another step. We have in here, when we say the user's data is equal in database and within the image, we call a send verified notification on Slack. Basically, it is just creating a HTTP post to Slack webhook, and then we specify the text with the name of the users and whether they are verified or not. In this case, I'm just making a case for the user is verified. So that's all. So I think that's all for the demo. Let me go back to my slide. No, yeah, I think that's all. That's how you're gonna orchestrate your serverless function. So right now, if you have serverless function, you don't have to make it tightly coupled with one another. You can just make it to run one single function, and then later you orchestrate it with Google Serverless Workflow. I think that's all, and I want to give credit for Philip Napik, because several slides that I use on this slide is taken from his talk in Google Cloud Next. Thank you.